Hi, I'm Jay Washburn,
And I'm Joe Bendoski.
and this is Start Writing. And today we're continuing our series that we're calling A Beginner's Guide to Writing a Novel. And
Yes. And this is all Jay. So he's been working really hard on this. And why don't you tell him what got you started on this road? I thought that was interesting.
so we just had a lot of our listeners ask, like, where do I get started among all your Start Writing episodes? Because we have a huge backlog. And we decided to create this little mini series. It's going to be 5 to 7 episodes as a place where people should start when they don't know, like it's their first time writing a novel, they want to learn the craft. These are just kind of the basics. And almost every topic that we touch on in this mini series, we've already gone way deeper into. Like there's a whole episode on villains or on just about everything you can think of. We go deep into it. And this is just kind of the beginning of all that. So it's a good place to start if you don't know where.
Well, and if I remember correctly, you had been given a novel by a friend, and it was his first novel, and you were reading through it and be like, he doesn't know all these things. I can tell just by reading his draft that he's given me that, these are big, important ideas that can really impact the overall shape of a novel. And they're not diving super deep into, this, I mean, we have episodes where we dissect sentences, right?
Yeah.
And so these are the bigger pieces that can really have a dramatic impact on the shape of your novel, particularly if you're new to the process.
Yeah. 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 And actually, so you mentioned one friend, but I've had several people ask this same kind of question. And I feel like, so this is going out to my friends and to anybody who's interested in figuring out where to begin. Before we dive into this episode, there are 3 things I just wanted to catch up. I honestly wish that this were a classroom setting because I have questions that I would love to ask and get responses and have dialogue, and we don't have that. However, I have my wife in particular, but a few people who are listening to these, and then they're giving me feedback afterward. And one thing that came up from the audience from last episode was I estimated that Rowling had named roughly 20 spells in the whole Harry Potter series. I was wrong. There are 77 spells. I missed it by quite a ways. And my wife said, "Well, that's okay. Your listeners should know by now that you're not very good at keeping track of the numbers." And
because of the years,
because of
we
the
were way
years.
off
So
in how many years
in episode 1, we're like, we've been podcasting a couple of years. It's 5 years, and we didn't know that. And she just thinks it's so funny that. But okay, we're word people, right? We're not numbers people.
That's funny.
So that's the first thing. The second one, I take reader feedback very seriously, and I've received feedbacks from readers before Joe actually read STARCHILD 3. Some other readers gave me feedback that I took to heart, and it literally caused a year delay, like an extra year of editing. Like, so that's significant, right? And then Joe recently gave me some.
Wow.
Yeah. But I guess I want to mention 2 things related to that. So one is that I take the feedback seriously, and I am willing to polish my book, even if it takes all that extra overhead, because I don't want just good. I want great. And so when I get that feedback, I want to do something about it. Now, having said that, I only do feedback when it resonates with me. And yes. I'm able to be stubborn and boundaried and just be like, no, I disagree with that feedback and I'm not changing it. I'm the author, I'm the artist, and this is how it's going to be.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, and I think a lot of that is also understanding your audience. So I had 2 people who had read my book. And one of them, he says, every time you talk about the guns and stuff, you've got to be more specific. I need to know exactly what they're using. And another of my readers was like, she's like, you are just too specific on the weapons. I don't need to know that much. Wow. And so what it really comes down to is like, who is a better representation of the people who are reading my book? Yeah. Because that's the advice I need to follow. Like the 2 readers had contradictory advice. And the one you need to lean into is the one who better represents the majority of the people who will pick your book up.
Yeah. So which way did you lean on that decision?
I have not gone more specific, but I think I need to. Just as the more I look at the market, the more it's like, no, I need to lean more into the specificity of the weapons, because I think those people are more likely to pick up thrillers. And just reading other thrillers in the genre, they tend to be more specific.
Yeah, that's cool. So this concept came up of receiving critical feedback, and then she listened to that episode, and you said, Joe, I had to change everything after chapter 8 because of something that Jay said. And she was suddenly like, whoa, this is not one-sided, is it? and really it's like, yeah, that's the writerly culture, and you have to embrace that feedback. And sometimes it's hard. Actually, it's almost hard every single time. It's hard, but it's the pain that, it's like the struggle you have to go through to get a polished draft.
But I mean, for me, it's like, I mean, once I got that advice, it's like, even though I knew it would be massive rewrites, it's like, I have to. He's 100% right. I have to rewrite from this point on to get where he said we should go, because he's right. You know, I mean, I couldn't look at the book and be okay with it any other way after that, because I knew you were right. It's like, he's right. It needs to go that way.
Man, and it's hard, but yeah, you got to do it. Okay, the third one, Joe, you asked me, what does conscient mean? And I gave some answer kind of off the cuff. And I literally forgot that conscient is a word that I made up based on conscious and sentient. And I put that in my story Bible. And so I looked it up, and I remembered, oh my gosh, I made up this word, and I had forgotten
this word. That's so funny.
Anyway, so conscious and sentient is conscient. And I've been trying to use that throughout the draft, kind of as a way to give some texture to the world. So, okay, today, the topic for today and for next lecture is hero/character. And to me, the hero is the most important of all your characterization. But what we talk about today with the hero applies to your entire cast. And next time we'll even get to like villains and stuff. And then by way of reminder, in the first lecture, we talked about how every bestseller or every great book needs to be really solid at plot, really solid at character, and really solid at world. You have to nail all three of those. Now, after you've hit that minimum bar of greatness, a lot of novels excel even further at one of those three categories. And so I pointed out Huckleberry Finn, I think, is one of those. It's a deep character novel, and it really excels at this. And I've got here on this image on the screen, Huckleberry Finn, Anna Karenina, and Harry Potter. And you'll notice something. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but all three of those titles are character names. And it kind of clues you in that, yeah, this author was really focused on character, and that's probably what it's going to deliver.
I think it's funny because I think of Harry Potter as very much a plot series.
Well, no, that's fair. I don't know if you have more to say on that.
No. I mean, yeah, it does feel very plot heavy, and I think maybe just as much as Harry Potter is really lightning in a jar as far as fiction goes, right? Like I remember news stories that people were hijacking trucks full of this book to sell it early for fortunes. Like Harry Potter was in its prime was a freakish phenomenon of success in books, right? I mean, it was insanely successful. It was unlike anything literature has ever seen, and I think part of that is that it is the closest to a perfect blend I think we've ever seen in a novel of character and plot and milieu all blended so well together. So I think it's called Harry Potter, but I think Harry Potter is really that ideal blend that you want for a novel.
And so the reason I picked it as a character book, and I think you're right that it does nail all three of those. And in fact, man, arguably it's the wonder of Hogwarts that really drives it, and then the exciting, I mean, they're basically mystery novels, and she sneaks in that mystery. Meanwhile, there's romance and all this other stuff going on.
So they're really, I think, the closest we've ever seen to a perfect blend.
Yeah. But I'm going to use it a bit in this lecture, and it's just because she has so many very unique and memorable characters. And so maybe that item is not way exceeding the others, but I do think she's just a stellar example of characterization in a novel. And so I just want to mention here too. So character is what I look for when I read. And usually if I have a critique about a book, most often it's something about the characters where I'm wishing, well, I just wish we'd gone a little deeper or we knew a little more or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're such a character guy because you mentioned In the Heights, and my roommate was watching it, and I've watched it for a little bit, and I was like, I agree with Jay's wife. Nothing happens.
Yeah.
There's nothing going on in this story.
That is so funny. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's very low on that one. Anyway, so I just decided to point out, so Locke and Starchild and X Dot, those are each character names. And that's something that I hope to deliver because it's what I really look for as a reader.
Yeah. Well, and even Starchild is a name, right? That's a last name, but it's still a name.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's important to me. And again, I can't claim to be perfect at it, but it's something I care about and I hope to deliver.
Yeah. Well, and then it made me think about my own titles, and my titles are premises, right?
Yeah. Just say them for our listeners.
The Skyfall Conspiracy. And When the Sky Falls, like, it's a series, so it's all kind of in the same vein, but yeah. And then but I mean, some of my future projects, Guilty, that's what's the other one? The Story of the Rise. So I mean, even my future projects that are in different series, the title is still very much the premise, not a character name. Wow, I never even thought about that.
Yeah, or like Jurassic Park, right? That title is the premise. And again, this isn't a hard and fast rule, but it's something interesting to notice because I do think they kind of gravitate that way. Okay, so I have a meme on the screen, and J.K. Rowling is on the top, and George Martin is on the bottom. And J.K. Rowling says, "It's hard killing off so many characters," and Martin says, "You're adorable," and he's got like this little grin,
smug grin, yeah. he kills off so many characters.
So, and I wanted to, well, first off, I want to share that I think these two are excellent examples of deep characters. Like, anyone can just name off this massive cast that they've put together, and you remember their characters really well.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, the characters of Hogwarts are memorable, but Martin is not just famous for his characters, but the transformations they move through.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like, Martin's characters, like, how you feel about the character is where you are in the story. Whereas, how we feel about Harry and Ron and Malfoy doesn't change,
Yeah.
I think the only one who has any kind of shift about how you feel about him is Snape, right? He's the only one who has that complexity to him. But with Martin, that's kind of the story with the exception of a very small handful of characters that you kind of always like. The rest of them, you're on a journey.
Yeah. Man, and he truly is a master of that.
Yes.
Okay, so two things that I wanted to mention related to this meme. One is she's saying it's hard killing off so many characters. So essentially, it's hard for her because she cares about the characters. She has empathy for them. And that's really important as an author to get into their minds and, make them friends, essentially. Like, make them real enough that you can then describe them as someone real. Then the second thing I want to mention about this is character deaths only matter if your readers care about the people who die. They have to care. They have to have that emotional investment. And in my first draft of X Dot, I had a character that died, and literally not a single beta reader mentioned that death. Like, they just did, it was just nothing. No blip. They didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And
and you were devastated.
Well, yeah, to be honest, because it was supposed to be this big moment. I mean, it is for the hero, but they weren't invested in the person who died. And I revised based on some of the things we'll talk about today. And then now I have a best friend who, like, every time he sees me, he says, "I can't believe you killed blank," like talking about this character, because it jarred him and it was hard. And he couldn't believe that I decided to be the one to do that. And so you have to get your readers to invest in your characters in order for them to care about like the hard times and whatnot. Okay, so in 1995, a guy named Daniel Goleman published a book called Emotional Intelligence. And because of his book and his research, it kind of pushed that phrase into the public spotlight. So you'll hear people talking about emotional intelligence, and it's because of Goleman. And basically what his research says is that your success doesn't depend on how smart you are, like IQ. It depends on your emotional intelligence, which they call EQ, like emotional quotient.
Right.
And so basically it's like if you're really smart and you know all the numbers or all the logic or whatever, you're not going to be as successful as someone who can convey those things and convince someone of those things. And so your emotional quotient, your EQ, matters for your success. And I believe that your success in writing characters is also based on that same trait. And I think some people are more inclined to that than others, but I also believe that it's a skill that you can develop. And so if you want to write good characters, and if you feel you're not great at EQ, or if you think you could get better at it, go look up this Goleman book. Or, at parties, make a point to sit there and feel what you're feeling and to observe what you see other people and how that's mirroring. And I think this is the number one thing that you can do to improve your ability to write good characters, is to just understand humans and human emotion. And now, as this is completely a funny side note, but this image I have on the screen is a book titled Emotional Intelligence, and it has 2 subtitles that are very keyword heavy. And then the author is Dale Goleman. And I looked this guy up, assuming it was the son of the original author. It appears to be no relation. This guy's only written 1 book, and I kind of think this book sells because it's a parody or like a copy of the original, but it has a really stellar cover and it has a ton of reviews, but I think it's like kind of a fake version of the actual book. Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Just good cover, good marketing.
Yeah. And I think they're making a killing off someone else's idea.
I have a friend, Sandra. She's a great writer. Like, I'm always impressed with her writing. And, she always talks about, she's like, I hear about all these books are bestsellers and I pick them up and they're terrible. and I was like, more than half of success in this industry is marketing,
Yeah.
I mean, I think, eventually a great book will be discovered, but that might be Moby Dick. You might be dead and gone long after before, your incredible novel is discovered if you don't have good marketing,
Man, and we go deep into marketing on a lot of episodes, and that's like a necessary skill for an author these days. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even when unless you're a huge name with a traditional publisher, you're going to be doing your own marketing. I think that's, I know that I talked to Jay about that. That's why I went indies, because, all of these contracts had, all of these clauses about all the marketing I had to do it. And after reading through them, I was like, why are you taking half, or more if I have to do all of this marketing stuff?
Okay. So this next thing that I wanted to mention, we've talked about how writing is a braid and you have to weave together plot, hero, and world. And my objective for today is to teach you how to build a character from the ground up. And for me, like I said last time, it starts with world. And my character is a product of the world. And you have to think of the nuances that influence. So today everybody carries a cell phone, and their interactions with their phone or lack of interactions or whatever is a part of who just about every single person is these days. And your world is going to have the same influence on your character. Going right along with that, your plot needs a certain type of hero. And if you can't walk to Mordor, then you can't be the one who's carrying the ring to Mordor. Like, you just can't. And I think there is some room to make a hero that seems incapable but finds another route, essentially. But your character, as you create characters, it should be woven with your world and your plot. So Steve Jobs is famous for the quote, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." And in my mind, if you create a copy, you're just looking at art that someone else created and you're duplicating it. And he says good artists. Like there's a feat to just mimic what someone else has done. Mm-hmm. But then he says great artists steal. And to me, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit in the rest of this, but to steal means you take something and you copy it, but then you tweak it and you innovate and you make it new. And that new thing ends up being something that's stronger and in many ways better than the thing that was mimicked in the first place. And I think the classic example of that is George Lucas. Like in his biography, it literally says that he called Star Wars his Flash Gordon thing. So like the title of it for him is different intellectual property. And what happened there was he was trying to license Flash Gordon and he was going to make a Flash Gordon movie and they wouldn't sell him the rights. So he's like, okay, well, I'll write my own thing.
My own.
Yeah, wow. And he did. And it's Star Wars. And honestly, a lot of influence from Flash Gordon, a lot of influence from Dune. Like there's some interesting overlap there. But what he did is he took that and he innovated. And he made it into something new and better than the original.
Yeah.
And so that's what we want to do as artists who steal.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I know we've mentioned this before, but George R.R. Martin literally took the War of the Roses and just kind of moved it into a semi-different fantasy world, you know, and just retold the story with different characters. And I mean, other than people like forced to go through the War of the Roses in English class, very few people would know that story. But you have to understand, George R. R. Martin has sold over 80 million copies of his book.
Insane.
like I mean, like people who have read those and then read the War of the Roses will be like, oh yeah, this is this character, this is this character. I get all of it. So the War of the Roses is between the houses of Lancaster and the House of York, which sound very similar to the House of Lannister and the House of Stark, to the point that you may have to listen to that again to sort out which side of those is which, right? Because it's like, oh, wow, those are so similar.
Yeah. And I just feel like that's really important to have a keen eye to know this is worth repurposing and then doing a good job of it and not just copying, but stealing. And that term steal, it's like, well, now it's mine, it's my own, and I possess it. And that's what you've got to do as you innovate. As an interesting side note, Pablo Picasso said, bad artists copy, good artists steal. And Steve Jobs basically stole that quote, and now he's more famous for it.
Yeah, Picasso. That's so funny.
It's just a crazy little irony.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's, yeah.
So along those lines, when I was a teenager, I guess, I'd already seen Indiana Jones like 1,000 times, and I watched a movie called Secret of the Incas, and it's starring Charlton Heston, and he's wearing a basically fedora and leather jacket, and I was seriously shocked. I was like, they just copied Indiana Jones.
But no, Indiana Jones copied him.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't realize that he was the original, and Indiana Jones was technically the copy, but Indiana Jones superseded the Secret of the Incas by so much that Incas just essentially vanished. And now Indiana Jones is the archetype of adventure.
Yeah.
And I actually just put a photo up here of Nathan Drake. There's a movie coming out. It's based on a Sony or a PlayStation video game. But so in this, he doesn't have a leather jacket. He doesn't have a hat. And he has arguably more character than Indiana Jones. And it's kind of interesting to see how they've tweaked that formula. And we'll see if that is a stolen idea.
Yeah, they've definitely, I imagine they probably started with Indiana Jones and then they went through some iterations, right? And they said Indiana Jones is famous for his hat, but his hat also does nothing but get in the way.
Yeah.
So I say, if Nathan Drake is a seasoned adventurer, he doesn't bring the hat anymore.
Yeah.
Right? He's learned his lesson.
Yeah, and I think it's a good innovation. And we'll see in the long term whether that pays off. But
yeah. So
okay, so Charles Dickens is known for the like grimy London that he painted. And he talks about something called workhouses where like children are laboring in these grimy, horrible working conditions, and they have to because of debt or because of their parents' debt or whatnot. And the interesting thing is Dickens didn't make that up, right? And that's the point I'm trying to drive across here, is that you don't just make up from whole cloth whatever your story is going to be. You pull it from different sources. And so when Dickens was a child, his father and mother, along with him, I'm not sure if he had siblings, went to a debtor's prison. So he literally lived that Oliver Twist. But, and here's the clincher, he kept that a secret till his dying day. And it wasn't until after he died that it became public knowledge that that was a part of his history. And so he took that real part of his life and put it in his works in a way that Dickens owns that more than history does, I feel like. Like
yes.
he stole it. He took it and it's his and it's in his books and he did it. So I'm going to say,
and I think like, if you think about when was that in history, like when is this time period in history, and be like, when did Dickens live? That's when it was, right? Like, like you don't even think of like dates or anything. You just think whenever Dickens was alive, that's when London was like that.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, I imagine they call that the Dickensian period. Like,
yes,
it's literally named after him now because he stole it. He now owns that. So cool. Okay, so again, I told you my objective for today is to get you to where you can write a character from scratch, from the ground up. And I told you one of the main principles in doing that is mimicry. And then again, don't forget emotional intelligence. That's essential too. Anyway, so my first novel, X. has a lot of stuff from real life. And it arguably takes place on the street I grew up on. There are some differences. But because of that, I've had people wonder if some of the villainy was supposed to be a certain person, like from my actual childhood. And I think that's a bit of a problem, right? That's a little too close to life if people are saying, wait, is that me? You know, and I don't want that. And it's not them, for the record. It's not them. It's characters. But you got to be careful about the way that you mimic real life. So that,
what is it? Seinfeld. So, I mean, most people know the very famous character Kramer. But Kramer's is not someone Jerry knew. They built him out of 3 different people that he knew.
And I think one of them literally had the name Kramer. And that's why there was a lawsuit.
But as far as like, so you got to be careful. But also, like I said, he didn't say, this is my friend Kramer, I'm just going to plug him into the show. He's going to say, this guy's got some really quirky traits. This guy's got some really quirky traits. This guy's got some really quirky traits. What happens if we just put all of that quirkiness into one dude? What do we get? You know,
you get a smash hit. That's what. I'm so glad you brought up Seinfeld. Okay, so this is a technique. So in X. I was trying to just make up characters as I was going and assign them traits that I knew and whatnot, and that was very challenging. So I've been experimenting with a new method, and that's to hire actors to play these roles. And this is something that goes on in my head as an author. And I have had beta readers guess, because they've heard me say that they've tried to guess who the actors were, and I've never had anybody guess correctly. In fact, and they'll guess wrong. They're like, "Oh, this is like so and so," and I'm like, "Oh, that actually is like so and so. That was unintentional. I was thinking of someone else," and I usually don't tell them who. But
that's funny.
So
why keep it secret? What's the end game there?
Honestly, I don't know. I feel a little weird about it, but and I don't know if there are like legal questions around that. So an interesting thing though is, so I've got Philip Seymour Hoffman up on the screen. He's he's played in, 15 or 25 movies, right? And he's not Philip Seymour Hoffman in those. He's a different character in each one of those. And I think, so my method is essentially to pull an actor from a specific role and then write that specific role into the character that I'm creating.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have people argue that, like, okay, you need to take Philip Seymour Hoffman and Matthew McConaughey, and you need to mix the two so that you get something original. And honestly, if that works for you, it's fine with me. But to be honest, I don't think it's necessary. And here's the reason why. When I have someone, like, I'll have someone describe who, oh, this is something that Jay would have said, or, oh, wasn't that just like you? Or, I mean, maybe they'll even buy you a birthday present and they're like, oh yeah, this is obviously what you love. And you're like, eh. So like other people's perception of you is you mixed with them, right? It's got a lot of them in it. It's not the actual you. And I think the same holds true here, that if you try to write Philip Seymour Hoffman, you're not going to write like the original guy. You're going to write close, and it's going to have a lot of you mixed in. And to me, that's innovating enough. It seems to be that it does create something new because it's your take on that. Anyway, so that's like a tip that I have. Hire an actor to play the roles that you're writing. And it's a really quick shortcut if you're a movie buff and have some concept of the actor.
Yeah, of who to put in that role. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next I want to talk about names. I don't know if you know, Indiana Jones in the original scripts was called Indiana Smith.
Whoa.
And honestly, that's mostly just an interesting factoid. But basically what we've got is Indiana. That's a very unique name, right?
Yes.
And so it tells us something. Oh, this character's unique and original and, kind of weird or something, that he's different. And then Smith and Jones, actually, says that he's just the next door neighbor guy. Like, he's run of the mill as you can get. And it's basically saying the opposite of what Indiana says. So Indiana Jones, that name,
I never thought of it that way,
telling something about the character that, well, he's wild and exotic, he's different, and he's just like you. He's a regular guy, no superpowers. He's got a bullwhip and he leaves his hat behind.
Do you know the reason for the change?
So actually, that's funny you asked. That leads right into the next thing. I think it was almost purely the sound of it. And Indiana Jones has a nice ring to it.
Yeah.
And Indiana Smith just seems a little bit like too concise. I don't know.
So this isn't a thing we do in English, but in Malagasy, there's a lot of times where words, if you have two words together, they combine them. And depending on how easily the sounds roll off the tongue, they will change the letter of the first part of the second word so that it is a smoother roll. And I wonder if that's just how it is. Just the way we form the end of an A to the beginning of an S is a harder roll for the tongue than a J, and that's why it feels like it rolls smoother. Because like I said, there are languages that build around that. Be like, this isn't rolling well, we change this letter. And that's just how things are done.
Man, so two things, and I wish I were saying this for the readers, but is Malagasy Madagascar?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And then the other thing is, you don't happen to have an example that you could share with us of two words?
I don't. It's been so long since I spoke this language, but I remember studying it and having to follow the rule. And like when I first encountered it, like I remember reading it and be like, why are they changing this letter? I'd be like, so it's just easier to say. I'd be like, it's just easier to say. That's it. I'd be like, yeah, it just makes it easier to say if you change that letter when you combine these two words. I'd be like, they do that. I'd be like, all the time. It's everywhere in this language.
I am so glad you brought that in, because that's exactly the principle here.
Yeah, so I imagine that like that is why it feels like they just go together better. It's just because it has that, but it's not something we talk about or really explore in English, because we don't swap letters out like that.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about a related principle. So names can mean things like, so I just barely learned that Dumbledore is an archaic word for bumblebee.
Whoa.
But we don't most of us, when we read it, we don't know that there's a connection there.
Right.
And I think Rowling had a statement saying like, well, I imagined him always humming because he loves music or something like that. And which is interesting because
that's not how I see him.
I don't remember him humming in the novels, but
yeah.
But the point is a name can have a meaning as a word. And most people would think that if you chop it down shorter, then there's no longer any meaning. But there's actually a lot of really cool research that says the phonemes, which is like less than a word, the sounds have emotional weight to them. And and it's actually like you can measure it, well, sorta, I mean, through psychological studies. But you can figure out that, oh, this sound, it's not even a word, but people have an emotional response to it.
So there is a poet who came across this concept. And so he created this book of poetry with each chapter dedicated to a sound. And so I think every word in the chapter begins with that letter, and there's a lot of it even throughout the words. And so you get a very strong sense of how each of these sounds kind of impacts the kind of, I guess, mood of a piece of literature. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Man, you don't know the title. You should send that to me.
You roughly Google it, and I'm pretty sure they can point you in that direction.
Yeah. So I just briefly wanted to talk about the sounds and the emotions that come from names. So when I think of Snape, it's similar to snake. It's similar to sneaking. And to be honest, like that's just an association. But somehow when I hear the name Snape, I just think, yeah, it's like this creepy, greasy, like it just fits. And I don't know any way to really describe it. I don't know the science. I haven't done a study, but I know how it feels to me. And that name feels sneaky. And
well, and I think like it's almost like she's done a slant rhyme, right? On snake, right?
Yeah.
To Snape.
Yeah.
And I think that works really well because this is a tool that has been around in literature for a really long time. I think when I first learned this, we were reading The Scarlet Letter, and we talk about the characters there, you know, like the villain guy is Chillingsworth, right? Like literally. You know, and so, you know, the Scarlet Letter is a little more blunt and beats you a little harder over the head with it. And I think that's where a little bit more of my admiration for the word Snape comes from, is because, you know, we didn't just take the attribute and plug it into the name. She slanted it enough that he has his own unique name, but also you very quickly make these associations once you get to know his character.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think each of these names can kind of do that. So Gilderoy sounds noble, and that's exactly what Lockhart, like, it's all about that front. It's about sounding noble.
Well, yeah, and then you got Gild in there, right? He's gilded.
Yeah, exactly. Weasley, I think, is interesting because it makes you think of something lowly and humble and maybe disliked, right? And I think that gives you sympathy for the Weasleys. I'm trying to think which other ones I should cover. Well, so, and then on the right, these are, Dickens wrote these names, and you may or may not be familiar with some of them. Scrooge is just perfect for Scrooge. It just feels like he's, I just don't know how to put it, but like,
well, I think
Scrooge.
Part of that is, I think that is a post association. I think the story is so familiar, so embedded in the culture, to the point that, you know, people begin to use the term Scrooge to refer to a miser, and then we have just picked up on that. So now it feels like it fits, but I don't feel like it did when he wrote it. You know, I feel like it was just a name, but it was, the story so well known and shared that I think our attachment there is post literary creation. Well,
and that's fair. There's tons of influence in the past on all these names, and it would be interesting to do it. Well, honestly, so a lot of these Dickensian names I'm not familiar with. So like Little Nell doesn't sound like a fortress, right? It sounds like this flower that needs protective. Like, it sounds weak. Pecksniff, just there's something revolting about it. Jellyby sounds fluffy to me. Maybe pompous, or I don't know. Magwitch has witch in it. I don't know if that's cheating.
I don't know if that's cheating.
Gradgrind, it's a single name, but it feels like those two syllables don't fit your Madagascar rule, right? It sounds like two separate words. Gradgrind.
Yeah.
It just feels like choppy and like it's cumbersome or something. And then the last one, this is cheating, but Charles Darnay, to me, sounds like someone who could be a hero, like who might do something noble. And so I think that's an important thing to think about. What emotions, regardless of the actual words, what emotions are the names of your characters going to make people feel?
So, and I don't remember if we talked about this on the podcast or not, but if you Google, like, just type in the first name of your character and then hit images on Google and see what celebrity pops up, because
that's a great idea.
That's who your people are going to think of, right? When you first introduce that character, until they're really familiar with them, they're not going to see your character. They're going to see that celebrity.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. That is such a good idea. I have never tried that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll tell you this one, and then I think we'll wrap it up. This has been longer than I thought, and we didn't even get through as many as I was hoping. So a name can also tell a story in itself. And this is that movie that Joe thought had no plot. This is In the Heights, and the kid introduces himself as Usnavi, and I think it sounds nice, but he says it's an unusual name. And then toward the end of the story, he says, "This is where my name comes from. My dad was coming from the Dominican Republic. He was on a boat. He didn't know how to speak English." And I can't remember if he was like illiterate in general, like could hardly read. But he sees on a boat, U.S. Navy. And if you're a Spanish speaker, you would pronounce that Us Navi.
Yeah.
And so he names his son Usnavi after U.S. Navy on a boat. And there's this whole story that like the son has inherited this ignorance and this, being at the bottom and needing to climb to the top. So his name has a whole story packed into it. And if you can do that kind of thing with your naming, you ought to, because it just makes it so much more rich. Okay, I'm going to skip a few slides, and the homework for this week is I want you to hire one actor for each of your central characters. So just, get out a sheet of paper, write down all your main characters, and then pick an actor or actress for each of them. And then in those same rows, you can brainstorm alternate names for each of your characters. Like, what if my Nate was named Jeff? Does that change anything? It just kind of get a feel for it and see how you react to each of those.
Yeah.
So that's what I got for this week. We got more tips on building characters next week, and we'll go into villains as well. That's all I have. Thank you for listening. It's time to start writing.